So let's go. Okay, so we'll start the meeting here. So I'm Brian Lance. Most of you know that. More importantly, this is Keisha's billboard. That's going to be going up. One of several. This is going to be what it looks like. Remember Uncle Sam Wants You? Remember from World War II? Selling bonds, U.S. government, Liberty bonds. So Keisha Rogers, she wants you, unbossed. I'm fighting for you. So this is that's a good way to start off the meeting here, I think.
Compliments of the artist.
Compliments of the artist. Was that Ian? Did you put that? Yes, Ian. Okay. Ian Overton put that together. All right, so those will be going up in the city. 2 or 3 of them, I guess, right? Okay, so, and I know there's yard signs on their way, and at the end, we're going to show a video. Keisha and, was it with Alicia? Alicia yes. Saratani?
Yes.
Have put together a 7-minute video. Keisha against Al. Keisha Rogers versus Al Green. And so greedy Al Green. Okay. So we're going to show that at the conclusion here. So okay, so moving along, might as well put up the second one there. Go on to the next. Oh, right, the Treaty of Westphalia, 1648. All right, we really had a set of developments this week that really put the potential for a new Treaty of Westphalia, or a Westphalian approach, front and center. And I'm referring to what occurred at the United Nations in particular, but also occurring around it and out of prior developments. One of the most important elements feeding into this is Trump's declassification order, which I think everybody here knows about, declassifying massive documents, the FISA warrant, or at least major pages of that, for Carter Page, the FISA application, for surveillance of the administration, the Trump administration, and before that, the Trump campaign. That's going to be made public. That's in the works. I'm not getting into the details of that here, but the declassification of these documents is going to be the further erosion of the whole Russiagate mime and the escalation of Muellergate. So that's underway, and that, of course, begins to free Trump up to do the kinds of things that can be done. Let's see, go on to the next, I think. Yeah, this is Trump at the United Nations this week at the General Assembly. While the U.S. media was twisting a single solitary moment in that presentation, Trump was actually delivering a really quite remarkable statement of his intentions and the intentions of our nation. He began very early on saying, "We believe that when nations respect the right of their neighbors and defend the interests of their people, they can better work together to secure the blessings of safety, prosperity, and peace. Each of us here today is the emissary of a distinct culture, a rich history, and a people bound together by ties of memory, tradition, and the values that make our homelands like nowhere else on earth. This is why America will always choose independence and cooperation over global governance, control, and domination. I honor the right of every nation in this room to pursue its own customs, beliefs, and traditions. The United States will not tell you how to live or work or worship. We only ask that you honor our sovereignty in return." So he continues in that vein, but he turns very quickly to the negotiations on the Korean Peninsula between North and South Korea, that this is one of his engagements that expresses this approach that he's taken. He slams the ICC, the so-called International Criminal Court, which has no, has no validity, as he said, something we've made a point of all along. And the African nations have clearly made that point as well, many others as well. That we're not going to fund it. The U.S. doesn't even recognize it. We're not even part of it. And he used that as an example of these globalized institutions that have failed the world. The response to his speech was also remarkable. There's obviously problems with his speech, but I'm leaving that aside because it's more important to really paint the thrust of what Trump is doing here. It really underscores why he's under attack from the British Empire. The response from China is reflected in Global Times, which is a English language newspaper, comes out in English language version. It's supported by military elements in China, defense and so forth. They editorialized in response in part, surely there are positive aspects as Trump emphasized the idea of national sovereignty in his UN speech. Historically, the concept of sovereignty and equality among nations was born at the same time in the Peace of Westphalia, a peace treaty that first introduced and assured the equality of national sovereignty. Nowadays, the indivisibility of sovereignty and equality bears crucial meaning to the world. And it continues from there, but I'll just leave it at that, just to give you a sense. China is very open to this approach. Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, who spoke also at the United Nations General Assembly on behalf of China, called win-win, as we know from the Belt and Road Initiative. The win-win approach is the call of our times. He called for a return to healthy and stable development of U.S.-China affairs. He said that China has no intention of seeking trade surpluses and is willing to resolve trade through consultations. And that's something that's been ongoing in terms of China's relationships with all the other countries along the Belt and Road. Lavrov from Russia supported President Trump's efforts on the peninsula of Korea. And by the way, that's something that Trump himself, he praised Russia, Japan, and China for their roles in that process that brings the end of the Korean War ever more close to conclusion. Lavrov otherwise called for the expansion of space cooperation. He supported Trump's initiative to convene a UN Security Council session on weapons of mass destruction as timely. So this is, and you may have heard just in the last 24 hours, Lavrov announced that they've formally invited President Trump to Sochi or Moscow, and otherwise a similar invitation has been extended from the White House to President Putin of Russia. So there's obviously more going on beyond that. That process is going forward for further discussions on that level. Let's go on to the next. So really, if you have the sense, this is what stands behind the new Bretton Woods proposal. And if you haven't seen the proposal, certainly let us know, and we'll make sure you get it before you leave, and we want you to sign on to it as signatories on the proposal. But the proposal is addressed to these four world leaders, that they act and convene as leaders. Putin, Trump, Xi Jinping, Modi of India, convene a new Bretton Woods conference to negotiate a new Bretton Woods agreement, setting up fixed exchange rates, a system of national credit aimed at developing full-set economies in the world, obviously inviting other countries to join in this process. And of course, this approach is based on the Bretton Woods Conference convened in 1944 that set up the post-World War II financial system. But it's important to point out, we're calling for these four world leaders to take the initiative from on high. Does that mean we're therefore sitting in the bleachers waiting to see if they act? Of course not. The point is, we want to encourage them, and President Trump has a very critical role to play for this initiative to be carried out. Really, in the scheme of things today, it's President Trump that can initiate, that can call this summit. He can be encouraged by the others to do that, but it's President Trump in particular who's in the position of convening such a summit. And some of the reasons for that summit we'll come back to in a little bit. Go on to the next. So this is on our website, the Schiller Institute website. It's also on the LaRouche PAC website for people to sign petitions. And you see a new paradigm for peace and economic development. The next slide. This is the original Bretton Woods. It's still there, the hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. And you see there, convened in July of 1944, 44 nations taking part. On to the next. And that's the meeting, the summit. Greatly informed by the Four Freedoms perspective of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, informed by the good neighbor policy that had been initiated starting in the 1930s in Central and South America with countries such as Brazil, Mexico, and others, where they already began the discussions of an international development bank, or Inter-American Bank as it was called at that time. Many of the concepts that then came forward later in terms of the Bretton Woods architecture that Roosevelt and his team were proposing were worked out in those earlier negotiations and collaboration that went on between the United States, Central America, South American countries during World War II. Go on to the next. And we convened in 1988 our own Bretton Woods conference. To Mr. LaRouche's right is Fred Wills, the former ambassador of Guyana to the United Nations, who had made the call for a new just world economic order in the 1970s. And Helga Zepp LaRouche, Mr. LaRouche's wife, is there on the left. So we've...
That was 1988?
This was 1988. January 1988. So, on to the next. And we're just going to kind of roll through some of these. And, of course, now, today, we're spearheading this effort with Keisha's campaign for Congress here in the 9th District, who is putting the new Bretton Woods proposal and its content of great projects forward at the very heart of her campaigning, addressing this in a not just bipartisan, but above partisan approach is in the U.S. national interest. And as well as endorsing Keisha's campaign, go on to the next, LaRouche is also supporting Ron Wazorik's campaign up there in South Dakota. You have Lynn there is holding Ron Wazorik's campaign brochure. This was taken a few months back. So we're on board on this. We're together on this. And these campaigns let's see. Yeah. Well, let's go on. Let's just go on here. All right. We're going to turn now to the economic crisis, what Helga Zepp-LaRouche has called the Achilles heel, and the critical reason why a new Bretton Woods summit, like what was convened in 1944, to put the world back together after World War II. That was the intent. It was pulled together just before the end of World War II. And so here's the start. I and Harley started out the article we wrote in the latest issue of EIR with this quotation from Linda LaRouche in 2007. And I'm sure you're already reading it through. But the world monetary financial system is actually now currently, remember, this is in July 25th. This is before Lehman Brothers and so forth. Bear Stearns, a couple of Bear Stearns vehicles, investment vehicles, had gone belly up. And Lynn said, that's it. It's on. So this statement was that was virtually a direct quote from Lynn at the time. The world monetary financial system is actually now currently in the process of disintegrating. There's nothing mysterious about this. I've talked about this for some time. It's been in progress. It's not abating. What's listed as stock values and market, and market values in the financial markets internationally is bunk. These are purely fictitious beliefs. There's no truth to it. The fakery is enormous. There is no possibility of a non-collapse of the present financial system. None. It's finished. Now, the present financial system cannot continue to exist under any circumstances, under any presidency, under any leadership. Only a fundamental and sudden change in the world monetary financial system will prevent a general, immediate, chain reaction type of collapse. And of course, that's what we saw happen. Despite the initiatives of LaRouche, this is from a few months later, the beginning of 2008 rather. What must be done to reverse the greatest collapse in history? Lynn had put forward the Homeowners and Bank Protection Act at that time. Note that it's both homeowners and bank protection. It would have frozen mortgages. It would have ultimately written them down. It would have kept the bank's doors open. It would begin the carrying out of a reorganization of the U.S. banking system and provided billions of dollars of credit into the real economy of the United States to restart the U.S. economy. That was initiated. Numbers of governors, state legislators around the country endorsed the proposal, but it was blocked by Wall Street and the City of London on Capitol Hill. Going forward, we're going to be talking some about the financials, the financial side of the current crisis. But I wanted to emphasize that this is not about, algorithms, financial algorithms. It's not about money. It's about human lives. It's about the future of humanity. Africa is going to have, which has a population now of 1.2 or so billion people, is going to have well over 2 billion, 2.5 billion people within the next 20, 25 years. The Belt and Road Initiative, as I think most of you know, has extended to Africa now with rail projects, schools, roads, highways, sanitation, and so forth. All of that is beginning to be built up. That's something the U.S. could be collaborating with and exporting to. On the lower picture, some of you may recognize this because this is from Sunnyside, right here in Houston, which is another reflection of this same crisis. much, much closer to home. But the solution is there's only one solution, and it solves both. And moving on to the next is just an example. Some of you have heard about the railroad that's been built in Kenya from the coast to the capital. This is the overall plan for building across Africa, the first transcontinental African railroad when it's completed. And other portions of it are being built, what will link into it from Nigeria and so on and so forth. Move on to the next. Okay, so this then is another closer to home reflection. I raised this the other day and just in a conversation, and people overheard it when I mentioned it, and people in the room were unaware of it. And you may be unaware of it. As of this year, as of right now, with the new school year, all Houston Independent School District students, as it says there, are eligible for free meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and at all schools, Houston Independent School District schools.
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
And dinner.
Wow.
Okay. The reason for that is because even last year, over 80% of the students qualified for because they were under the poverty level. 80% officially.
How do you determine the poverty level?
I'm not.
I'm sorry, never mind.
Yeah. They live on less than you do. And so this year, it was just decided, and it's being funded by the federal government. It was decided to just give free meals to everybody. That was simpler. Plus, you were not putting kids and their parents in the position of trying to apply to get into a program. I.e., applying, saying I'm poor, and being degraded in the process, and the kids being embarrassed, by getting in line to get their lunches with a coupon or a card or whatever.
Right.
However, so they just changed it across the board. But this is how poor. This is the entire school district.
Wow.
Of Houston, Texas.
What do they expect for the dinner? The kids are going to go home and then come back for dinner at 6 o'clock?
They can get dinner before they leave, after sports, whatever. I'm not trying to be the expert on this.
Okay.
I'm just making a point here.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
So moving on into the financials. But first by introducing Puerto Rico, because that's a little bit further away, but this is the growth in Puerto Rico's debt, and running up. That's only up to 2014, and this goes more to the point of why underlying it all, Puerto Rico has not recovered from the hurricane. That is the in-depth devastation of the economy of Puerto Rico and the lack of development, economic development. But let me also just quote the Ghanan president at the United Nations General Assembly, Nana Akufo-Addo. When he addressed the General Assembly, he stressed that Ghana, he said, we are taking a different path by forging relations with China. And then he addressed the critics who have been warning of a debt trap, that China is just trying to get African nations into debt traps and so on and so forth. And he stated, utilizing the example of what the British did in China at the turn of the 20th century, the British and Allied colonial powers. He said it was Western companies financed by Western loans to a nearly bankrupt China dynasty that created the circumstances under which Hong Kong was leased to the British for 99 years. And the rest, as the saying goes, is history. And that's very much the Puerto Rico story, but it's also the story of Sunnyside. Let's go on. Sunnyside in Houston, Texas. This is just from the other day. Another recession looming. This is the Wall Street Journal, Martin Feldstein. 10 years after the Great Recession, that's how they keep trying to downplay what actually began back in 2007, 2008. Another great, long, deep downturn may soon roil the U.S. economy, and so on and so forth. The next one. Global debt hits a new record at $247 trillion. This is, I believe, CNBC. Yes. The debt to GDP ratio has exceeded 318%. So on and so forth. In other words, the mass media, right? This is now out in the mass media. Maybe you've stopped listening to the mass media because you didn't want to be driven crazy or whatever. But this is out there. Go ahead with the next. This is from a little earlier. This is from June of this year. Are we in a corporate debt bubble? Excuse me. We're talking about here. The last one was talking about global debt, total debt. This is talking about U.S. corporate debt. And here's a quotation from the article. This is McKinsey and Company. Debt capital markets provide an important asset class for institutional investors and give large corporations an alternative to bank loans. Yet it is also clear that many high-risk borrowers have tapped the bond market in the years of ultra-cheap credit. Over the next 5 years, a record $1.5 trillion worth of non-financial corporate bonds will mature each year as some companies struggle to repay defaults defaults will most likely rise with the rising interest rates. The average quality of borrowers has declined in the United States. 22% of non-financial corporate debt outstanding comprises junk bonds from speculative grade issuers, and another 40% are rated BBB, just one notch above junk. In other words, nearly two-thirds of bonds are from companies at a higher risk of default industry, including many U.S. retailers, and it goes on from there. On to the next. And this is just a graphic. This is from Goldman Sachs. This is the rise. Since the 2007-8 crisis, we've reported on this extensively, long before these guys decided to tell you about it. The rising levels of debt, total debt, and rising interest rates, and so forth, shown there. The falling interest rates, the rising debt, you get the picture. So on to the next. Now what's really going on, and this is what Lynn was addressing, and what still has to be addressed, we're at a critical point again in the what Lynn defined as his triple curve, a collapse function. And many of you know this, so I'm going to keep this brief again. Most importantly, at the bottom is the collapse of physical economic input-output. What you're looking at is a timeline, as if going linearly, as if you could do that through time, from the past to the present to the future. And this is the collapse of physical output, input-output elements, market baskets. And that's what you see in Sunnyside. And that's what we've seen around the world, and would see even more if it was not for the Belt and Road Initiative. On the other side, there it's in gold. On the other side of the line, the timeline, you have the growth of financial aggregates, which is in burgundy. That's the debt, financial aggregates. It's also the derivatives market, which these other characters are not even telling you about. It's there in the background. but they're not even mentioning it. And those financial aggregates continue to soar. The forms have changed, and global derivatives have shrunk due to something called financial compression. They've managed ways to try to manage the total amount of financial derivatives. But the financial aggregates in totality can only be supported by a growth of printing press, money. That's the growth of monetary aggregates. And as pointed out there, the critical juncture is where monetary aggregates, the printing press operation, exceeds the rate at which financial aggregates are being created. Go on to the next. This is just another way of looking at this in terms of derivatives themselves. This is utilizing the official figures, in this case, over-the-counter derivatives as recognized by the Bank of International Settlements. The actual amount of derivatives is not known because much of it occurs in the shadow banking system. What's all that falls under that, which is a very hodgepodge bunch of stuff. Banks create vehicles, and you don't know what all those vehicles are doing, and the bank regulators don't know what all those vehicles are doing. So they're also engaged in derivatives, products, swaps, and so forth. So the conservative estimate that we've used in the past is that you've got to double or triple that amount to have an approximation of what the total derivatives market actually is, which has been sitting around $1.2 quadrillion for some time, and it's not even clear that that's accurate. But you see the derivatives compared to these other categories, compared to U.S. GDP way over there. Well, I think U.S. GDP is now officially 19 trillion, so that dates these figures here a little bit. But anyway, you get, by comparison, you get the idea. This is all bets. This is all bets. This is all a bunch of financial operations, companies, and so forth, engaged in making bets. The debt that's being talked about in terms of the corporate debt a moment ago in McKinsey and Company, or even the global financial debt that's reached, what was it, 249 trillion officially, but who's counting? That's merely the detonator on the actual derivatives financial bubble. Go on to the next. And this is another way of looking at it. Money supply, the global GDP, which is now up to about 75 trillion, and there's a lot of fluff in that. But then up to 100 trillion, which is roughly currently the value of all world stocks and bond markets. But then the derivatives is when you're really getting to talk about the whole package. So go on to the next.
Brian, if you look at that, where would be like physical production, let's say, in that thing there? Could you get
no, I'm not.
Just financial.
Okay.
In terms of real value,
Yeah.
physical value,
Yeah.
I couldn't
Yeah. Okay, just
guesstimate a figure. I mean, that's the most important feature. Go on to the next.
Okay.
This is what, this is, basically what's occurred since 2008 financial crash. This is what Lynn forecast would happen. The printing press, the QE, right? Quantitative easing. The central banks have pumped $20+ trillion in pure printing press operations. That's the central banks of Japan, the United States, United Kingdom, and who else am I forgetting about? But European Union, European Central Bank. So the monetary aggregates have continued to grow. Most of it digital. It's not cash in terms of greenbacks or something. And financial aggregates turned downward, perhaps not that sharply. This was a forecast by Lynn, but that's what occurred. But the physical economic collapse has continued outside of the Belt and Road environment. So I hope that's useful. Go on to the next.
Is that now, or is it going to be? Is
that's what's occurred since 2008. Go back to the last one, just so if we jumped off a cliff. So 2008 to the present, roughly.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right. I'm sorry.
But then this was done as a forecast, roughly. A heuristic drawing of a forecast.
They're making it gradual, though, like the blue line. It's gradually going down, or is it?
Well, look at the opioid epidemic, suicide rates. Look at the fact that our entire school district has to feed kids so that they're awake in the classroom and can study.
Well, I'm saying that blue line. So that really the line means to pass because it's okay. It's the way it's drawn, because it's drawn right there on the parallel to that 2008 ball there, and so it's plummeted down. Oh, never mind. I think it's just the drawing to it. Because did they perceive, like in 1980, that it was all going down, or was that a sudden drop in 2008 when all those mortgage-backed security things crashed?
Oh, it was a sudden drop.
So
there was a sudden wipeout.
Drawn on that map.
I mean, Lehman Brothers had
right, it was
360,000 or
right.
whatever positions in derivatives when they went under in 2008.
Okay.
Yeah, 10 years ago this month.
So
Isn't that measuring the rate of change? That's not the absolute.
Well, yeah, that's the rate of. Think of it as rate of change. Yeah.
Okay.
on their stock? Is that what people lost? Did they lose everything, like their annuities and all of that other stuff?
Yeah, that's included. That there was a writing down of derivatives to a certain extent. There was losses. Major losses. Chain reaction. Think of a nuclear bomb going off. It ripped through the economy, right? We all know about that. People felt it in terms of losing their mortgages. People, over 1 million, 2 million American families were thrown out of their homes. All of that's a reflection. People lost their jobs, right? I mean, there was a huge downturns of jobs. All of that was a reflection. But in terms of the financial aggregates, yes, that's mortgages, credit card debt that was written off because people couldn't pay it because they'd lost their jobs. All of that, right? Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Can I just point out that the timeline starts at 1971,
Right.
because August 15th, 1971 is when Nixon took the dollar off gold, and that Lyndon LaRouche had forecast Nixon was going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a forecast of later what he said was going to happen to us, which is what's happening now. So, Syed, you had a question?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All my cousins would have started their career like 10 years, 15 years back. Most of them are in engineering and IT,
Mm-hmm.
people from the subcontinent, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh.
Sure.
By the time they will retire, they're predicting, their retirement fund will be anywhere from 2.5 million to 3 million.
Each?
Yeah, I'm talking about they have invested
Mm-hmm.
for 30 years. After
Mhm.
30 years of working, they're mostly well paid and assuming that they will be able to keep their jobs for 30 years,
Oh, okay.
or they can maintain their. How realistic is that? Can they?
It's not realistic at all. You're going to get wiped out.
One
But more importantly is what they need to do, which is they need to support and join and support this movement and support Keisha's campaign for Congress. Because we've got to get it. That's why we have to get a new Bretton Woods conference convened. The crisis was not solved in 2008. the financial aggregates took a downturn. They didn't disappear. All of this new debt, the 249 trillion, whatever it is now, in total global debt, all that's financialized. All that's been turned into derivatives. There's now bets on that 6 different ways to Sunday. The monetary aggregates continue to grow. So the bubble, the global bubble, is bigger now, but the actual ability of the economy outside the Belt and Road to support that system is less. So we're headed, this is why these talk about a looming crisis, is it's recognized.
Is that related to the devaluation of currency in
Turkey, Argentina,
Pakistan?
Sure, all of these, the whole system, it's a good question. The whole system is becoming more and more unstable, right? You have these monetary aggregates, so you have a lot of money sloshing around. Banks are lending. Money's available at low interest, right? Money borrowed at low interest. There's a dollar carry trade. There was a yen carry trade. Now, there still is a yen carry trade, but there's a dollar carry trade. People are borrowing in the United States. Operators, financial operatives, are borrowing in the United States at low interest rate. They were going to Argentina. They were going to Turkey, or similarly out of the European Central Bank. They were lending into Turkey in particular. And then interest rates are now being raised in the United States as a really belated effort to try to close the barn door after the cow is out of the barn, and that, among other factors, has resulted in a situation where those speculators are pulling their money out of Turkey, or in the case of Turkey, in many cases, it's corporate defaults in Turkey. The Turkish companies can't pay the interest on the debt as it's coming due, so they're defaulting. So that's hitting back on the banks, right, and so on. So likewise, in a different form with Argentina, but yes.
Also in Pakistan, now they're just borrowing to pay the interest on their debt.
Okay. Okay.
But wow,
So
term
you-
is the interest.
My God, international monetary. More than
Let's move on here, and then we can come back to more questions and comments later. How does that sound? Okay, because I'm afraid we're going to go off in a lot of different directions that are useful. So the steps to be taken are these 4. These are the 4 laws, as Len calls them, the 4 initiatives that have to be taken as a package to reorganize the economy of not just the United States, but simultaneously in collaboration through a new Bretton Woods summit, a global, functioning global system. Glass-Steagall, which is bank separation. That's the separation of commercial banking, again, from so-called investment banking. That is the law that was put in place in 1933 and was the law up until 1999 in the United States, Glass-Steagall. That means that commercial banks cannot lend for speculation. What's fed the financial aggregates, derivatives and so forth, the growth of that bubble, was that suddenly not only were the savings and loan looted and bankrupted, that's another story, but then they moved on to the commercial banks. The commercial banks, with 1999 and the changes there, the entire deposit base of commercial banks became available for speculative investment. Every commercial banking house set up its own trading floors, right? Or they collaborated with others that were more experienced, to invest in those trading floors and their financial activities. And so the money that you put into your Wells Fargo or B of A account doesn't sit around here in Houston and get invested, on Main Street or in U.S. industry. Virtually all of it goes into speculation. Because Glass-Steagall was repealed, but FDIC still stands behind deposits, the U.S. government and the FDIC in particular stand behind those commercial banks that now have all their money, invested in a ticking bomb. So this is what led to the bailout in 2008, was they tried to bail the damn thing out. But that didn't solve anything. It just kicked the can down the road, as it's been said. Secondly, so Glass-Steagall, reenactment, and that means you're going to send in the bank auditors into the banks. You're going to open up the books. You're going to write down the useless financial paper, the fictitious values. That's a critical part of what's going to be done. Those banks remaining able to cope, even with federal help, are not going to have much to lend. National banking is the critical function then that has to go along simultaneous with Glass-Steagall, because you've got to set up an institution, a federal institution, to provide credit from the federal government into the real economy, the physical real economy of the United States, to grow it. Thirdly, and that's what I'm already talking about, is credit. You've got to generate credits as opposed to debt. You've got to create credits, lending into investment into production, lending to build high-speed rail, lending to build more power plants. We need a lot of additional power plants. We don't even have a functioning physical economy in the United States. And we're maxed out in terms of power utilization, in terms of power availability and utilization. So we're going to have to build a lot more electrical generation capacity, nuclear power plants and so forth. All of that's going to have to will be done, can be done with federal credits. It's not a matter of going to Wall Street and borrowing money from Wall Street to build these things. Wall Street is belly up. They won't lend to that anyway. There's not the rate of return. So it has to be done as in the 1930s. The means by which we got out of the Depression in the 1930s was through federal credit, through the Reconstruction Finance Corporation in particular, but also federal loans otherwise. And fourthly, alongside of this, of course, a science driver centered around fusion energy, both for domestic and international use on Earth, but also fusion because of the critical role that it can play as the key energy source to power man into interplanetary space, right? To begin moving man off Earth. Not moving everybody out there, but beginning to move a lot of people. Not at the cost of 500,000 per person or 2 million per person, in terms of, or $1 billion per person. Or, Musk has his wacko figures. I mean, look at what's happening in Tesla. We should know not to trust SpaceX. But even if you look at, yeah, we know what he's smoking. Yeah. But also NASA has its figure. I mean, the costs are, out of this world. So we have to bring those costs way down. We have to, and it fundamentally comes down to we have to have a new energy source for space travel and space colonization. But that will pay off. That will be a science driver for the U.S. economy, as NASA was in the 1960s, as the original work on nuclear power was back in the 40s. Those are the four. But I would just emphasize at this point, positively, that all of this proceeds from a single unity. And that's what Lyndon LaRouche wants us to really wrap our minds around, which is these are not 1, 2, 3, 4, and you check them off. It's that, what are they all based on? The center, at the center of this is man. Man as a creative being, that every man and woman, is a potential genius. That it's the development, and it has always been the development of the creative powers of our people that has powered our economic development. From Alexander Hamilton, from the founding of the nation. That's been and understood as such, that was the fundamental source of wealth. So it was the development. That's why we have public school systems. That's why we built a national highway system. That's why we, a power system for the country as a whole. We used different mechanisms and so on, but the point was we had to lift the entire population up to achieve the kind of levels of productivity that would allow our continued development. So placing man at the center is a complete shift. You know, as I think most of you recognize, that's a complete shift from today, where each human being you are literally told that you are a Hobbesian beast. You know, your decisions are avoid pain, seek pleasure. And that's how, you know, just stick to that, buddy, and things will work out. Don't try to mess around with the big picture. Don't try to think that you can shape the course of history. And so we're saying that is indeed what got us into this. This is a Hobbesian, you know, self-destructive frenzy that's been going on, most recently shown in the Kavanaugh hearings. Quite aside from anything regarding Kavanaugh himself, just the nature of what's going on. I mean, literally, think about it. We're shredding the judicial system of the United States, right up to the Supreme Court. We're shredding the entire system. You're guilty until proven innocent. The 14th Amendment doesn't exist. You know, this is another reflection of this Hobbesian each against all mentality. Don't ask me about what's rational, what's true. You know, it's your feelings that count, isn't it? It's your feelings that count, right? So you have your feelings. I want this guy lynched, you know. On the other hand, somebody else says, yeah, and I want every one of those welfare recipients, you know, thrown into the Gulf of Mexico, you know, cut off, you know, and so forth, right? These are all. This is this Hobbesian. This is not humanity. This is not you as a human being. This is what they're trying to say. This is what we're making you. So this is a total transformation, a total break with that. This is the real revolution that began really in many ways with the 2016 election in terms of revolt against this neoliberal outlook of Hobbesian outlook. On to the next. So this is just the growth of corporate debt here. I mean, bonds. We were talking about bonds and bonds in terms of that McKinsey and Company report. But you see the growth of total loans. This is the corporate stock buyback, mergers and acquisitions bubble that's been going on. And then we have the next one, which has just been this overall decline in the workforce participation rate, which has seen a slight improvement, but it's still, you know, this is all the kids living at home with their parents when they're 35, 40 years old.
2000 was the peak.
Huh.
That 2000 was the peak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the bust of the dot-com bubble.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
but also then the beginning of 9/11,
Mm-hmm.
and then the wars.
Mm-hmm. 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 I mean, this is. I would treat this just heuristically. You know, that is just. These are actual statistics. This is from the Federal Bureau of Statistics, Department of Labor. But this also includes the elderly. You know, above retirement age. It includes kids that are in college for good reasons. And in terms of what you're talking about is 100% participation would include all of those people. So all of those people aren't going to be in the working force, you know, at any given moment in time. But nonetheless, the plummeting of workforce participation is what's really significant here.
Why is it so low in the 1960s? It's because women were, you know, I mean, today we're assuming all the women part of the workforce. Maybe back in the 60s they didn't believe that or something. Right. Well, no, because
It
women.
goes down in 55 or something. There's a
Yeah, that makes sense.
looking at.
The post-World War II baby boomer period.
Right. Okay.
Mothers were at home. We got to have a lot more mothers at home in the future, you know.
You didn't get
But that means you got to pay the workforce more. Anyway, so yes, that's I think that's true. So okay, so the belt. So the approach, 4 laws, a new Bretton Woods, a negotiation process, leading to the development of mankind as a whole. Here shown in terms of infrastructure, in terms of land bridge corridors, of rail development. You're not even talking here about maritime transportation and so forth. But still, nonetheless, this is where we want to be moving, and we want the United States integrated into this. And you go to the next one. People are familiar, I think, with this. You know, this is what a high-speed rail system would look like in the United States, as developed by Hal Cooper. In terms of this is again just a sketch, but it's along the actual corridors and utilizing many of the highway corridors that currently exist, the meridians between the line highway and the highways. And then to the land bridge itself, I think people have all seen pictures like this. Since you're here and you've run into us, you've met us, and you've been in a dialogue with us to varying degrees. This is at least the outlines of what the Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013, looks like in terms of its major corridors of development, including very extensively in Africa. There's better drawings than this in terms of Eurasia itself, but they almost all leave off Africa. And Africa is a major part of the Belt and Road Initiative now. And I've yet to see an actual set of maps that even begin to show what it looks like in South America and the Caribbean, as that's now beginning to be developed. But nonetheless, this is a huge, enormous undertaking. It's the largest infrastructure project in mankind's history. That's agreed. It's the largest in mankind's history. Far bigger than the Marshall Plan. Compare 10, 11, 12 times the size of the Marshall Plan. And it's an initiative. It's open-ended. It's not completed. It's open and open for collaboration on the part of any nation or institution. Now, so I want to conclude by just bringing up, I think at this point we can, well, let's see, what's the next quote there? I've got a quote coming up here. What's the next one?
It looks like it's on the question of trade.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, go ahead and go to this one. China just, and I handed this out to people. This is the handout I assume most of you got. If you didn't get it, raise your hand, and we'll try to get you one. Not that you have to look at it this second, but this is, as I was starting to say, China has just released what is titled The Facts and China's Position on China-U.S. Trade Friction. They don't say trade war, they say trade friction. And this was just released, actually just came out in English a couple of days ago. And they're getting it out everywhere, not just in English, Spanish, German. You know, they want a wide discussion of this. And this is their response to the current situation. And it raises some very useful points from the standpoint of the U.S. economy and understanding what actually lies underneath the trade relationship. So let's look at what they're saying here at this point, and then we'll turn on the lights and go a little bit further. But again, this is from the standpoint of not selling you on China's view, because there are several aspects to what they present in the paper that are wrong. And we can come back to that as well. But it's important when certain points are raised that are true, that they be discussed. That's the point of dialogue. As Trump has said, it's not important that you talk to your friends. That happens anyway. It's important that you talk to your enemies, particularly, as he said, if they're nuclear armed. So here we go. In today's world of greater globalization and widespread international production, bilateral trade and economic cooperation already extend beyond trade in goods. Trade in services and sales of local subsidiaries in the host country, local sales in two-way investment, should also be included. If we give full consideration to these three factors, trade in goods, trade in services, and sales of local subsidiaries in the host country, trade and economic cooperation delivers balanced benefits in general for China and the United States, with the latter, that is the United States, reaping more net benefits. According to MOFCOM, the U.S. ran a surplus of U.S. $54.1 billion in trade in services, that's in 2017, indicating its remarkable competitive strength in this area. According to the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, the sales of U.S. companies in China, sales by U.S. companies in China, reached U.S. $481 billion. In 2015, that's the last year that full figures are available. Way higher than the U.S. $25.6 billion sales of Chinese companies in the U.S., an advantage of U.S. $455.8 billion. Okay. Now, so let's take this apart a little bit. Okay? The sales in China. And then I'll go on to a couple of other things and we can come back to this. Sales in China, that's General Motors. They sell about 2 million cars in China. Ford sells about 1 million. And you can go on from there. If you're driving in Beijing or Shanghai, you've got Volvos, Toyota, SUVs, all kinds of things on the road. You know, and they don't have a lot of older cars like we have here.
Because they were all driving bicycles not long ago.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay? And those cars are largely produced in China. Okay? So where do the profits go? Well, they go to Ford and General Motors. They go to the companies, right? That's rightful. And they make their money. And for many companies, China is a bigger market today than the United States is for them in terms of sales. All right, so that's some of what you're talking about. Okay, so then I'll give you another example here. I'm just opening this up just so I get the figures right. They're just kind of fun. The iPhone 7. Okay. You don't like them.
I can't afford it.
Okay. All right. The iPhones are produced in China.
Yes.
Okay. Give me a couple of things. What do you think China gets for each iPhone, or Chinese companies get for each iPhone they produce in China? You know, that they manufacture,
$10
process. Close. That's close.
I think
That's
may
cool.
be actually a little bit above.
And
Yeah.
An iPhone 7 it sells here for what? In the US?
700.
Okay. 600. Okay. They get $5.96 for manufacturing, and they get $2.50 for the battery. You know, there's one Chinese company that produces batteries for the iPhone 7, and they get $2.50 for every battery they sell to Apple.
Make those.
Okay. Now, yeah, the parts come in from South Korea and Taiwan and elsewhere. You know, the what is it? Liquid display. Maybe I'm behind the times. Whatever they call the display part of it, the processor and so forth. The software all comes in from abroad, right? Touchscreen. Okay, there we go. Comes in. and that's all supplied to the Chinese manufacturers, who then manufacture, or the word sometimes is used, process. They process these parts, and they turn out the iPhone. Okay, and for that they get a total between various Chinese companies is $8.50 per phone. Okay, the total cost of the phone leaving China, total with all these parts coming in from the other countries, is a total of something like $247. Okay, and then you get an idea of what the markup is on an iPhone. Huge. And that goes to Apple, right? And Apple, of course, uses that money to hire people to open showrooms and stores and advertising and maintenance, and whatever, so there's people here that end up getting employed. But anyway, but you see my point. Now, think of that in terms of the trade deficit. Every one of those phones, in terms of the trade deficit, is contributing $247 plus to the trade deficit between the United States and China. But China is only getting $8.50 out of that phone. Taiwan, South Korea, wherever the components are being made, that's contributed value added to that phone, right? That went into it. They're not part of the deficit. They don't have an additional trade deficit from every one of those iPhones. China's the one that's got the deficit, or the surplus, so-called surplus, right? Oh, China's got this huge surplus. We've got this deficit with China. No, you don't have a deficit with China, right? They're just the go-between. They're just the pass-through. But so if you put together, Deutsche Bank actually came out with a study of this back in June. I'm not saying that it's perfect or anything like that, but just for an estimate, they said if you put together what U.S. companies are producing in China, for the Chinese market, you put that together with what the U.S. is getting from its own sales to China, which is not insignificant. What is a couple $100 billion a year? Plus the services that we're selling to China every year in various forms, that all told, the U.S. has a net positive trade balance with China of about $20 billion a year. So I'm saying all this because it just shows you, how completely misleading the whole idea of the U.S.-China trade deficit problem is. But also it should show a window, or begin to open up a window to how it could be solved. Right? It's not, there's many other aspects to the situation. China's, as a percentage of GDP, China's exports have been falling since around 2008, since the financial crash, but as a percentage of GDP. So in 2008, the percent of their GDP, the total output, just as a rough figure, measure of total output, approximately 35% of all their GDP output was for exports to all countries. Right? Now it's only about 18%. The difference is domestic consumption. They're raising the standard of living in China. They're intent on doing it even more rapidly. That's the actual content of China 2025, or one aspect of it. It is the development of labor power. They know that they've got to improve the standard of living to upgrade their workforce. They're putting an enormous number of students, into college and into graduate programs and so on and so forth. They're promoting R&D. They're expanding their space program. They're really taking pages out of the book of the United States from the Roosevelt period, but I'm thinking right now of the Kennedy period. Yep. This is what they're committed to. So this is just from this is 2 weeks ago. This is at what's called the Summer Davos. And Li Keqiang spoke there, the premier. He's actually the person that announced China 2025, which is their big program for upgrading of their entire economy and creation of new growth drivers, as they refer to them. This is just I'm sorry for the delay. This is just a one sentence quote. Given that consumption has now become the primary driver of China's economic growth, we need to increase household incomes through multiple channels to expand the spending power of our consumers. Okay, that's how it's translated. So China is not interested in being the exporter to the entire world. They're not out to eat our lunch. You know, that's not their intention. They're already shifting. They have the Belt and Road. They're already moving lower productivity, low wage, low skill jobs out of China because frankly, it can't be done there anymore. The wage levels and cost of materials and so forth are going up, and so this is already being shipped out along the Belt and Road. You know, these jobs, these factories and so on, steel, manufacturing, shoes in Ethiopia. I mean, you name it, and they then will climb as well. So I mean, it's not shipping it there because they're going to be stuck producing these things. It's that this is a process by which you're bootstrapping the whole world economy. That's what they have in mind. Maybe I should just stop there and open it up. Just one other aspect to this: foreign direct investment. China's stealing all our knowledge. Maybe I should just, they impose these conditions and so on and so forth. Well, foreign direct investment, okay, they're stealing from us. Oh, well, in 2017, what's the largest source of foreign direct investment in China? Hong Kong. 47%, 47.7% of all foreign direct investment into China is from Hong Kong. That's followed by number 2, Singapore, number 3, Taiwan, followed by South Korea, followed by Japan, and then comes the United States. We're right ahead of the Netherlands. Okay, so they are, if they're they're stealing everybody else's lunch. Maybe I don't know. That's not the point. The point is that the world is a much different and more fascinating place, than this kind of two-dimensional us against them shootout at the OK Corral, kind of way it's presented, and it's got to be sorted out. Now think about a new Bretton Woods. Well, it's crazy. So who's paying for all these iPhones being imported from China? At 247 and then doubled in price or more. Who's actually paying for that? Well, Americans are paying for some of it. All these other imports, garments, shoes, machinery. Machinery is at the top and has been at the top of Chinese exports to the United States for a long, long, long time. Who's paying for all this? Well, as pointed out by the Chinese themselves, the U.S. trade deficit is essentially contributed by the utilization of excess savings of other countries to maintain the level of consumption beyond its own production capacity. I mean, this is a crazy world. So the debt of the United States, all these other countries, right, are lending into the U.S. This is the debt bubble particularly U.S. government bonds, but other forms as well. But on top of that is the financialization of the whole world economy. You have a world think about I'm jumping here around, and I hope you follow the threads. Maybe I'm assuming more than and you can ask questions. Maybe I'm assuming more that you know more than you know in terms of some of these aspects. You take so-called global supply chains. An increase of tariffs against China or Europe or Canada will disrupt global supply chains. Well, and this will disrupt as well global value chains. That's where a train of different companies in different countries contribute to an output of a given good, right? That's a value chain. Each one is value added right along the way or whatever. Well, think about it. Every time a good or service moves from one country to another, it's financialized under a regime of floating exchange rates, right? Marcia mentioned 1971. The dollar went off the gold standard. That meant that as a result, over the next few years, currencies started floating against each other, right? The dollar and then other currencies. So from moment to moment, these values change. Currencies change. So who plays in the currency markets? The City of London, Wall Street, etc. The City of London is the center of derivatives trading today in the world. It's the center of global derivatives trading. So every one of these goods moving from country to country, it's got to be insured on a ship. It's probably by Lloyd's or some other company out of London. It's got to be, it's the currencies. You got to move out of the peso into the dollar. Maybe you're going to Deutschmark eventually, but the dollar is the accepted medium of exchange. Up until recently, now that's becoming a little more ambiguous, but nonetheless, the point is that you've got to move out of your currency, or the good has to be moved and transferred into another currency form, right? And so these so-called global chains are financialized chains. It's another aspect of this. So Bretton Woods, in launching a fixed exchange rate system, is immediately aborting that whole insane process. You're locking in currencies within, relatively within fixed limits. They can fluctuate some. Countries can obviously moderate some. Even under the original Bretton Woods, so-called developing countries had more leeway on exchange controls and currency valuations vis-a-vis the dollar than more advanced sector countries. So you can build all these kind of things in to make it, give everybody a little flexibility where it's needed. But the point is, you're getting the speculators out of there. You're just moving them out of the picture. And in terms of exports, China is 42% of the global machine tool market. They buy 40% of the world's output of machine tools. Yet today, only about 22% of their machine tools are CNC, computer numerically controlled. Where in the advanced sector, it's 70 or 80%. What I'm saying is there's a huge market there, and we could be producing, in terms of capital goods, to that market. There's a lot that can be worked out. And the final thing I just wanted to point out, you can turn on the light, is that on the next to last page of your handout, you can read the handout later, but at the very top of the next to the last page, at the bottom there's a chart called bilateral goods deficit, but that's not what, I'm just saying that to make sure you're on the right page. But at the very top it says fourth, this is the consequence, are you with me?
Yes.
Yeah. Fourth, this is the consequence of U.S. export control over high-tech products exported to China. There's a tremendous capital goods export controls. Supposedly on national security grounds. We can't let them have this know-how, right?
Bag of fertilizer.
Yeah, right. So go to the I'm going down to the sentence that starts about halfway down at the end of the line. According to a report by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in April 2017, I looked at it. If U.S. export controls on China are relaxed to the level of those on Brazil, its deficit, that is the U.S. deficit with China, could be cut by 24%. And 35% if relaxed to the level of France. You see that there?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay? So I'm not saying that figure is exactly right, but China here is reporting this and making a clear point. They want to import. The U.S. has advantages, has know-how, so let's open up these lines. If we're not in a geopolitical mindset, if we're not perceiving China as our enemy, which we have no reason to do, then these problems, in terms of trade and otherwise, can be rapidly resolved. And in the context of a new Bretton Woods process, we can begin to sort these things and many other things out. So we're open for questions, and we have the video of Keisha too.
Why don't we take the questions and then we'll have to talk to him about the video. Right.
Yeah, Pete, yeah.
I think one way you have to think about that is that the process of the Belt and Road is actually a never-ending process, because the emission of new technology and science in the areas that don't have it is going to create the basis for growth in the advanced sector on newer technology, which is going to constantly have to flow. And at some point, the nations of the world will be constantly making contributions to that process and having it spread anywhere in the world it needs to.
Yeah.
Or the universe, right. But it's a never-ending process. So what the Chinese have done is not simply say, okay, here's how we're going to develop, and then stop. But they've created a system that allows mankind to collaborate with itself for development. And I think that's important to think about it in that way. The other thing I wanted to ask about is something much very simple. Is what is this? When we talk about foreign direct investment, we're talking about some fund that loans money into China. That would be foreign direct investment.
Well, it can be in the form of joint ventures.
It'd be like with General Motors.
Yeah, that's
a factory.
Yeah, they're doing it in a partnership with a Chinese company.
That's a foreign direct.
That's one example. That's an example of a joint venture, right? But it can also be a wholly owned foreign firm setting up shop in China, which the Chinese are opening up the doors to that much more broadly. It could be, it could be it could be a research company, a joint project. There's also, keep in mind, as I said, well, maybe I didn't say it here, but from the start, they started reform and opening up. That's 1978 with Deng Xiaoping, and within 2 years, I think it was in 1980 that the first special investment zone was created down there in the Pearl River Delta, and so it began then. Virtually all the money for 2 decades, was all out of Asia. It was Chinese diaspora investing back into mainland China from Taiwan it could be anywhere, Malaysia, the United States, whatever. But it was because they knew China. They spoke the language. They knew the culture, right? Remember, this is right after the Cultural Revolution. Companies weren't not exactly excited about jumping into China. They didn't know what was going to happen next. So this is where the resource was coming. I just think it's important, as in terms of understanding this question of foreign direct investment, that it's never come from the United States primarily at all. It's come from all these other places. The 2017 figures is not an anomaly. So the U.S. just came along more later. So foreign direct investment can take all these different forms. It's not that it's fund that invests for you. It's companies or partnerships.
No.
I was going to say that this was the option of foreign direct investment was secondary to begin with. Initially, the initial idea was contractual agreements, which is not considered foreign direct investment. That is when I contract with Peter Chen, in China, to build this following product for me, right? And I'm going to provide the diagrams and maybe some tools and whatever that he needs to set up this plant. And I'm going to pay him so much per unit, right? A straight contract, right? Very quickly that was dumped, not because of pressure from China. That was dumped because the people coming in to invest didn't want that arm's length relationship, right? They wanted the control partnership. They wanted to be in there and be in the problem solving and so forth.
Now that brings up in my mind is what I hear every now and then talk about China buying up the United States. The foreign direct investment from China into the United States. What's the story on that?
Well, that's China's been allowed in terms of real estate. That's about it. I mean, there's some more, but it's very small. I quoted the figure I had up on the board. China's profits or income, not just profits, but income from all of its investments in the United States was for that year, I guess it was 2015. It was cited was like $20 billion, where the United States company's income was like $500 billion in China. So largely, China's been kept out of the United States. Their purchases of U.S. companies have been nixed one after the other, whether they're high tech or they're not, and there's a general environment. Quite aside from the U.S. government taking action, I know from Chinese businessmen that they've just run up against a wall, on the part of U.S. banks or anybody to even consider financing or partnerships or whatever. So there's there's also it's unspoken in some ways. Discrimination. No.
I remember at one time we said that the British owned the large. It was the entity that held the largest amount of real estate in the United States.
Yeah,
than
I don't.
Anybody else?
Yeah, could be. No, I mean, look, a lot of money that's going into China in terms of foreign direct investment, there's a significant portion of it, a part of it, which is coming out of the Bermuda Islands, out of the offshore dope incorporated banks in Hong Kong and through Hong Kong and then into the mainland. Anyway, so China's has got some problems to deal with.
You hazard a forecast as what might happen in the month of October, Brian, between now and the election. Do you think
I only tell that to my paying clientele. What will happen in October? In what regard? What regard are you touching?
Well,
I mean, in terms of what? In terms of U.S. China, or tariffs, or
talking about
or the markets?
The markets.
Oh, the
bubble,
blowout.
The bubble imploding.
Yeah. I mean, I'm of the. I could be convinced otherwise, but I'm of the opinion that, for example, there's a significant and growing part of trading, by hedge funds and so forth, that's done through AI, through artificial intelligence. Literally, the computers make the decisions on buys and sells based on the data and algorithms that they're programmed with. And I think that just underscores the point that there's so many factors here, and the market is so crazy, and it's an everything bubble. I mean, it's everything from student loans and car loans and used car loans repackaged as financial derivatives on up the ladder. Credit card debt, college loan debt, if I didn't mention it, that nobody's got a handle on it right now. So I really do think it's a situation where what Helga Zepp-LaRouche is saying, what Lynn has said in the past, you can't call it.
I mean, it's not an arbitrary thing. I mean, October is kind of known as the witching month, right?
Yeah,
It is the fiscal year ends tomorrow, I think, right? And there's a lot of reasons, and there's an election coming up, and there's certain interests that might want to see a crash.
Yeah,
of some sort,
but
right?
that's the flip side. I don't think anyone's in control of the situation to flip a switch. This is way beyond, the way beyond. And on the other hand, you have the Belt and Road.
Right.
So that's a very important factor. If you're sitting in Frankfurt, Germany, or even London, what are going to be the consequences of trying to flip the switch? Is it going to go your way? But I don't think anyone's in the position to do that or do it in any predictable fashion. Cause and effect fashion. Somebody could do it accidentally. Lots of ways you can go off accidentally.
It can happen accidentally.
Regarding China's investment worldwide, China is building a huge port in Pakistan.
Yeah.
That's gonna benefit Pakistan
Gwadar
exporting their
port.
goods to the Middle Eastern market. They are building some hydroelectric or they're building roads from China to Nepal via Tibet. And they're supposed to build a canal in Nicaragua. And all their infrastructure project in the subcontinent, India is, going berserk about it. They're saying, you're selling...
Less so now. They were, but not so much now.
You're selling your country, the new prime minister in Pakistan. It's all geopolitics. But I think Mahathir Mohamad, the 95-year-old prime minister, he has scrapped some of the deals with China. He's saying it's too expensive, we cannot afford. But eventually, it will elevate Pakistan's economy.
Yeah.
The port, they have a port. It's like only 500 miles from Dubai, UAE. If I'm not mistaken. 500
in
miles.
Balochistan, in the western part of Pakistan.
So overall, whatever China is doing, it's like the Belt and Road Initiative, and it's
and the things are getting worked out. But, I don't know about the scrapping or this or that. China's also, and Pakistan are agreed to. They're inviting other companies in. I think Saudi Arabia, if I remember it, is now going to be investing in some new big project as part of the Belt and Road in Pakistan. I don't think it's.
Mahathir had. He's just scrapping few because it was done.
Because of his the corrupt former prime minister.
Right.
He was just there in China, patching things up, putting things right. Yeah. No, I think that's all for the better. We just got to get in there alongside.
I've been to Malaysia. I've seen from the early 90s to recently. It's, things have really developed. You wouldn't find a poor person
After this brief video, if you all would please stay put, I have a few announcements I'd like to make.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, this is Keisha Rogers, and I'm running for Congress in the 9th Congressional District of Texas to defeat greedy Al Green. As you might know, Al Green has led the impeachment crusade against Donald Trump since early 2017. I think the current coup against the duly elected president, Donald Trump, is occurring because he cannot be controlled by the Washington political establishment or the international oligarchs and bankers they answer to. I've asked my friends to review for you what Al Green says about impeaching Donald Trump and how dangerous and incompatible his rhetoric is with the very principles of our Constitution itself.
On May 17, 2017, Al Green grabbed national headlines when he took to the floor of the House and called for the impeachment of Donald Trump.
Mr. Speaker, our democracy is at risk. Mr. Speaker, this offense has occurred before our very eyes. It is perspicuous. It is easy to understand. Mr. Speaker, we are talking about a president who fired the FBI director who was investigating the president for his connections to Russian involvement in the president's election.
Citing obstruction of justice, Greedy Al accused the president of interfering with the witch hunt known as Russiagate when Trump fired FBI head James Comey earlier that month. However, even when Democrats admitted that it is the president's prerogative to hire and fire his intelligence chiefs, Al knew he needed a plan B.
Mr. Speaker, I rise tonight to make one point. That one point is that a president need not be convicted of a criminal offense to be impeached. In fact, need not be charged with a criminal offense.
This time, Green took a different approach. After all, who needs the Constitution when you've got hurt feelings? Ever the opportunist, Greedy Green went to the floor of the House and tried to turn political differences into criminal charges. Green cited Trump's attack on NFL players for refusing to salute the American flag, Trump's not condemning the Charlottesville protests enough, the president's travel ban from certain Muslim-majority countries, and calling Florida Congresswoman Frederica Wilson wacky. These, Al Green insists, are grounds for overturning the results of the 2016 elections and impeaching the president. As opposed to Al's gibberish, the Founding Fathers took impeachment seriously. Here's what they say in the Constitution. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So why would Greedy Al Green, who knows there is no serious case for Trump's removal from office, continue to wave the flag of impeachment? Because it is making him a lot of money. Since Al Green began this campaign, contributions to his re-election campaign have almost doubled. Not from the constituents in Texas he claims to represent, but from National Democratic Party-related entities. Even in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey, which devastated the city of Houston and the 9th District, Al Green hosts a day-long seminar on guess what? Hurricane recovery? Job creation? Flood prevention? Nope. Impeachment.
Greedy Al Green likes to claim that he is the advocate of the last, the least, and the lost. Yet, he is one of the 10 richest congressmen of Texas, presiding over one of the 10 poorest districts in Texas. He has an estimated net worth of $5 million. The 2016 census puts the average income per household of the district at $58,000. Our own Sunnyside district as the 6th most dangerous neighborhood in the USA, where residents have a 1 in 11 chance of becoming a victim of crime. And there are more single mothers than 97.7% of all neighborhoods in the entire country. One of the hardest hit areas of foreclosure from the financial collapse of 2008 is our own Missouri City. In the last 10 years, mortgages in Missouri City have doubled, while foreclosure rates in Missouri City are triple the rates of Texas and more than double the national rate. The answer to this level of poverty is an economic program which breaks people out of poverty. Ask yourself, does the resist movement led by Al Green have any program for this country other than overturning the results of the 2016 election and returning to decades of war, drugs, and economic decline represented by George Bush and Barack Obama? Do the people of the 9th District know that it is their congressmen and the resist movement's theatrics which are sabotaging Trump's ability to follow through with his initiatives? Al Green's idea is merely service the poor, including drug legalization, cheap housing, sentencing reform, and other measures which assume that poverty itself will never be conquered. That the job of an elected official serving Wall Street is to make the level of extreme poverty somehow a bit more comfortable. I choose, on the other hand, to attack and conquer poverty itself. My program, both in the 9th District and nationally, puts an emphasis on major infrastructure projects. My slogan, Great Projects for a Great America, is resonating throughout the community and around the nation. It involves creating a modern manufacturing platform for our economy. It involves, here in Houston, major flood control and water infrastructure projects. Moving to the next level of human economy with fusion power and space exploration. This must be coupled with an educational program which challenges all children to think creatively and be challenged to their fullest potential. We need to give our young people the work skills they need to be productive citizens. Let's restore our apprenticeship programs and on-the-job training. We need programs modeled on the Civilian Conservation Corps to put our nation to work and restore a national mission again, like the one we had under the space program. It's time for Americans to think big again, as Americans used to do. I need you to join me in this fight to help me to defeat greedy Al Green. We have to put an end to this impeachment coup now. Send me to Congress so that I can fight for you, so that I can fight on behalf of the nation. Unbought and unbossed, I will represent you in Congress. Please donate today. Thank you.
Paid for and authorized by Keisha Rogers, 2018.